I don't remember ever thinking that I was enough. Not in a dramatic way. Not with self-hatred or despair. Just, quietly. There was always something to adjust. Something to improve. Something to correct. Something that needed to be better before I could relax. If I felt uncomfortable, I assumed I was wrong. If something didn't work, I assumed I needed to change. If I felt out of place, I assumed the problem was me. That assumption shaped everything. I didn't see myself as broken, just unfinished. A work in progress that required constant attention. And as long as I was improving, I felt justified. As long as I was fixing myself, I believed I was moving forward. I became very good at self-correction. I noticed my flaws quickly. My weaknesses. My emotional reactions. My doubts. I observed myself closely and made adjustments in real time, softening my tone, suppressing impulses, reworking my thoughts. I told myself this was maturity. Self-awareness. Growth. Discipline. People admired it. They said I was reflective. Responsible. Someone who took accountability seriously. Someone who didn't blame the world for their problems. I took pride in that. I believed that if something in my life felt wrong, the solution was always internal. Work harder. Think differently. Be more patient. Be less sensitive. Be stronger. Be calmer. There was always a better version of me to aim for. That version was never here yet. I didn't ask myself what I wanted. I asked what I needed to fix first. Every emotion went through evaluation. Was it reasonable? Was it productive? Was it justified? If the answer was no, I corrected it. I didn't allow myself to be messy. Messy felt irresponsible. So I cleaned myself up, internally. Again and again. I didn't notice how tiring that was, because it had become automatic. The moment something surfaced, dissatisfaction, frustration, sadness, desire, my mind jumped in to manage it. Don't overreact. This isn't a big deal. You just need to work on yourself more. Those phrases lived in my head like maintenance instructions. I wasn't cruel to myself. I was relentless. I thought that was the same thing as being strong. Over time, something strange happened. I stopped trusting my first reactions. If I felt drawn to something, I questioned it. If I felt resistant, I corrected it. If I felt unhappy, I reframed it. Nothing was allowed to simply be. I lived inside a constant feedback loop, experiencing myself and immediately editing the experience. I didn't realize how little room that left for living. I was always slightly behind my own life, adjusting instead of inhabiting it. People around me saw someone composed. Balanced. Rational. Someone who handled things well and didn't fall apart. They didn't see how much effort that took. They didn't see how often I swallowed reactions before they reached the surface. How often I talked myself out of feelings instead of through them. How often I convinced myself that discomfort was just another sign I needed to improve. I became my own project. And projects never end. There was always another trait to refine. Another habit to optimize. Another emotional response to regulate. I consumed advice eagerly, books, ideas, frameworks, anything that promised clarity or control. Control was the goal. If I could just fix myself enough, life would finally feel right. That belief kept me going for years. It also kept me from asking a dangerous question: what if I'm not meant to be constantly corrected? I didn't ask that yet. Instead, I pushed harder. I became more self-aware. More disciplined. More introspective. I caught my mistakes faster, adjusted sooner, reacted less. From the outside, I looked like I was growing. Inside, something was shrinking. I stopped feeling spontaneous. Joy felt muted. Desire felt suspicious. Anger felt unacceptable. Sadness felt like failure. Everything had to be processed, improved, neutralized. I didn't allow myself to simply feel something and stay with it. I always had to fix it. And slowly, without noticing, I stopped recognizing which parts of me were authentic, and which were just corrections layered on top of corrections. I had edited myself so thoroughly that I no longer knew what the unedited version looked like. That realization didn't arrive as panic. It arrived as exhaustion. A deep, quiet tiredness that no amount of rest fixed. Not physical. Existential. I remember sitting alone one evening, surrounded by plans and notes and reminders of who I was trying to become, and feeling something crack inside me. A thought surfaced that I had no answer for: if I'm always fixing myself, when do I actually get to live as myself? That question didn't accuse me. It scared me. Because for the first time, I suspected that the thing I believed was saving me might be the very thing that was erasing me. Once that question appeared, when do I actually get to live as myself? I tried to handle it the same way I handled everything else. I tried to fix it. I told myself the exhaustion meant I needed better balance, better systems, better habits. I looked for a smarter way to self-correct, a gentler framework, a healthier version of discipline. I didn't question the premise. I questioned my execution. That's how deep it went. Instead of asking whether constant self-improvement was the problem, I assumed I just wasn't doing it well enough. Maybe I was pushing too hard. Maybe I needed more compassion, but still within the same structure. Still with the same goal. Become better. Become calmer. Become more acceptable. I softened the language, but the pressure remained. I noticed how quickly I turned every feeling into a task. If I felt anxious, I analyzed it. If I felt sad, I searched for the lesson. If I felt angry, I interrogated the cause and worked on reducing it. Nothing was allowed to stand on its own. Experience was never enough. It always had to become insight. At some point, I realized I didn't remember the last time I had felt something without immediately stepping outside of it. I couldn't just be angry, I had to understand why. I couldn't just be happy, I had to evaluate whether it was sustainable. I couldn't just want something, I had to justify it. I lived one step removed from myself. That distance felt like control. But it was isolation. I began to notice how carefully I monitored my inner world, as if I didn't trust it to behave appropriately without supervision. I treated my emotions like children that needed constant correction, constant instruction, constant restraint. I never asked what they were trying to tell me. I only asked how to quiet them. That approach had consequences. The more I corrected myself, the less clear I became. Signals blurred. Intuition weakened. I stopped knowing whether something felt wrong because it truly was, or because it didn't align with my current improvement plan. I had replaced listening with managing. And management has no end point. There was always something to adjust. I noticed how my relationships reflected this pattern. I presented a refined version of myself, thoughtful, regulated, self-aware. People felt safe around me. Conversations stayed reasonable. Conflicts were handled maturely. But something was missing. Depth. I didn't let myself react fully, so others never saw my full response. I didn't let myself be messy, so connections remained polite instead of intimate. I didn't let myself be uncertain, so I was rarely surprised. I had become predictable, even to myself. I realized how rarely I felt moved by anything. Not bored, exactly, just untouched. Music didn't linger. Conversations didn't echo. Experiences passed through me without leaving much behind. I blamed desensitization. Burnout. Age. Anything but the obvious. I had trained myself to neutralize intensity. I thought intensity was the enemy of stability. But stability without intensity became emptiness. There was a moment, small, unremarkable, that clarified it for me. Someone reacted emotionally to something I said. Not excessively. Just honestly. Their voice changed. Their expression shifted. They didn't edit themselves in real time. I felt uncomfortable. Not because they were wrong. Because they were free. That reaction exposed something painful. I realized how much effort I put into not being too much. How much of my energy went into staying within acceptable emotional range. How often I cut myself down to size before anyone else had the chance. I had internalized an editor that never slept. I thought it was protecting me. But it was also censoring me. I began to see how my constant self-correction had turned into self-distrust. I didn't believe my first impulse. I didn't believe my emotions. I didn't believe my wants. I believed the version of myself that had already been filtered, refined, approved. And that version felt increasingly artificial. I felt a strange grief then. Not for something that had happened, but for something that had been prevented. For the version of me that might have existed if I hadn't constantly stepped in to fix myself before life had a chance to respond. For the reactions I never allowed to finish. For the feelings I never let deepen. I realized that I had been treating my inner life like a problem to solve instead of a reality to inhabit. I thought awareness meant control. I was wrong. Awareness without acceptance becomes surveillance. And I had been surveilling myself for years. That's when I started noticing the cost more clearly. Not in dramatic breakdowns. In absence. I felt absent from my own joy. Absent from my anger. Absent from my sadness. Even absent from my curiosity. Everything had to be corrected before it could be trusted. And something inside me finally asked, quietly, without drama, what if nothing is wrong with me? That thought felt dangerous. Because if nothing was wrong with me, then all this fixing wasn't growth. It was avoidance. Avoidance of feeling deeply. Avoidance of uncertainty. Avoidance of the risk that comes with letting yourself exist without constant supervision. I didn't know how to stop yet. I only knew that continuing this way was no longer neutral. It was costing me something essential. Not my productivity. Not my stability. My presence. And for the first time, I suspected that the breakdown I feared wasn't emotional chaos. It was the moment I would finally stop correcting myself long enough to feel what had been there all along. Stopping the fixing didn't feel like relief. It felt like falling. When you've spent years correcting yourself before anyone else can, letting go of that control feels reckless. Exposed. Almost immoral. I had lived under the assumption that if I didn't manage myself constantly, something terrible would happen. That I would become too emotional. Too unstable. Too much. So when I finally stopped correcting a feeling, just once, my body reacted with panic. I didn't analyze it. I didn't reframe it. I didn't soften it. I let it stay. And nothing collapsed. That was the most unsettling part. I realized how much energy I had spent preventing disasters that never actually arrived. How much of my life had been shaped by an internal warning system that treated authenticity as danger. The more I allowed feelings to exist without editing them, the clearer something became. They passed. Not because I fixed them, but because they were allowed to complete themselves. Anger rose and settled. Sadness deepened and eased. Joy flickered and lingered longer than it used to. I had forgotten that emotions have their own intelligence. I had never trusted it. For years, I believed that discipline meant constant intervention. That awareness meant distance. That growth meant improvement. Letting go of those beliefs felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory without a map. I didn't become chaotic. I became human. That came with discomfort. Without constant self-correction, I had to face parts of myself I had kept neatly controlled. I had to feel disappointment without immediately turning it into insight. I had to feel desire without neutralizing it as unrealistic. I had to feel regret without explaining it away. Those feelings hurt. But they also connected. For the first time in a long while, my inner world felt coherent instead of managed. I wasn't observing myself anymore, I was inside myself. That changed how I experienced everything. Moments began to register. Not louder, not happier, but deeper. Conversations stayed with me. Music lingered. Silence felt less threatening. I didn't rush to fill every gap with improvement. I wasn't trying to become better. I was trying to become present. I also began to grieve. Grieve the years I spent treating myself like a problem. Grieve the parts of me that were constantly interrupted before they could speak. Grieve the spontaneity I had mistaken for immaturity. Grieve the intensity one had mistaken for instability. I didn't judge that past version of me. It had done what it knew how to do. Fixing myself had once been a way to survive, to belong, to stay in control, to avoid pain. But survival strategies don't always know when to stop. Mine didn't. I learned something uncomfortable but necessary: you can improve yourself into invisibility. You can self-regulate until nothing moves. You can become so aware that you never actually live. I had confused growth with constant correction. But growth also requires trust. Trust that your feelings are not enemies. Trust that discomfort doesn't need immediate resolution. Trust that you don't have to be optimized to be real. I'm not saying I stopped reflecting. I stopped policing. There's a difference. I still think. I still learn. I still change. But I no longer assume that every uncomfortable feeling means I need to fix myself. Sometimes it just means I'm alive. That shift didn't make my life easier. It made it heavier. More demanding. More honest. But also more mine. If you're listening to this and you recognize the pattern, the endless self-improvement, the constant self-monitoring, the quiet belief that you are always one correction away from being acceptable, I want you to hear this without accusation: you are not broken. And you don't need to be constantly fixed to deserve your own life. Self-awareness is powerful. But without self-acceptance, it becomes a cage. I spent my life fixing myself. And in doing so, I almost erased the person I was trying to improve. Stopping didn't make me perfect. It made me present. And presence, flawed, unpolished, uncertain, has given me something self-correction never could. A life that feels like it's actually happening to me. Not something I'm endlessly preparing for. Not something I'm managing from a distance. But something I am finally inside of. That's what I lost while fixing myself. And that's what I am slowly, carefully learning to live again.